All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sandy Allen. Welcome to BREB Class 4. It is quite a weekend in America and across the world, but especially here in America. I definitely took some time and thought about, should we continue talking about BREB? And it's a real question. I want to first just thank all of you who are out in the streets protesting. I want to thank you, those of you who have already been donating your money to bail funds, especially. If you're a white person and you're sitting home and you haven't given money yet, this is me telling you to give money right now. Give money to the bail fund nearest you. My husband, producer, best friend, roommate, Rob Dubbin, has put a bit.ly on the bottom third there that should have a link to your closest bail fund. So before we sit down and take a breath and talk about carbs, I would like you to make sure you're doing what you can to support anti-racism during this time. Black Lives Matter, fuck the police. All right. We're going to be having a lot of fun today talking about starter discard. Now, if you are one of the humans who just started making bread since the pandemic, or even if you're just a human who's been paying attention since the pandemic, you might have noticed that there's a lot of conversation all of a sudden about not just sourdough starters, but also sourdough starter discard. I think this is actually one of those points about sourdough baking that can be really easily misunderstood, which is, and I definitely didn't understand it at first, which is every day, right, like we've covered on this show before, we are going to feed our starter. At least that's how I do my starter. Maybe you have a once a week starter. Maybe you have a twice a day starter, which I've heard of and I don't totally understand. So my important goo here, I feed it every day. As you know, I'm going to take a little bit of that 50-50 flour. I'm first going to discard roughly 80%. Bye-bye. Okay. Into this container that, as we've explained in previous classes, I keep in the fridge, slightly ajar, and we are going to be playing from that container today. So 50-50 whole wheat bread flour, some filtered water in roughly equal proportion, trying to get that kind of pancakey consistency. All right, so important goo has been fed. Brat can worship at its feet. And now we will turn our attention to today's real star, which is this container, which is, it's called discard, but we're not actually discarding it, and we're going to make all sorts of wonderful stuff out of it. Holy cow. I mean, honestly, this bucket of goo, of all of my favorite buckets of goo in my life, this is really a good bucket of goo. So we're going to be making a couple of delicious things from this discarded starter today. The first thing that we're going to be playing with is going to be sourdough crackers, which we're going to put some Parmesan cheese and red pepper flakes and sea salt in, olive oil. It's going to be super delicious. We're also going to be making some dairy-free sourdough pancakes, which one could also make as a waffle. And we're going to be doing them dairy-free because I like them that way, and also because that's what I have. And so it'll feature coconut oil instead of butter. It'll feature oat milk instead of buttermilk or whatever dairy you would normally use. I'm going to be looking at the Bon Appetit recipe for the cracker and adapting from that. I'll be doing a King Arthur recipe for the pancake, so I'll be adapting from that. You can look up either of those recipes. But the basic idea here today is I'm going to be taking this bucket of stuff that we've thrown out ostensibly and making delicious shit from it. And as usual, I might swear. If you have kids around, just make sure they're the kinds who are really down with swearing. So what we're going to play with first is making a cracker. So I have my bucket of discard here. I'm going to take a bowl, like a decent-sized mixing bowl. And I am going to, first of all, take a cup of the discard, which, again, I keep in the fridge, so it's usually pretty cold and kind of hard to work with. But we'll get about a cup of that. And we will put it in this bowl. Per usual, if you have questions, I'll try to do a Q&A at the end of the class today. Feel free to drop them in the chat at any point, and Rob will bring them to my attention. And they don't need to be about what we're doing today, but if they are, wow, how fun. Okay, so now I'll take a cup of flour. Oh, I'm realizing there's that. and a pinch of salt, and quarter cup of olive oil. One of the fun things about these crackers is that they are very, very, very fast to make, and they're also very fast to eat. I find that if I make these crackers, they are gone almost instantaneously. It's kind of a miracle. And then to this, we will be adding some Parmesan cheese. And the effect of it, especially when I add the roasted red pepper flakes, is it's kind of like if a spicy Cheez-It like grew up and turned into like the cracker it really wanted to be. Like when the spicy Cheez-It has like gone to therapy and worked on its shit and like broken up with its problematic friends, or, you know, whatever the things are that it needed to do in its life. That's how I feel this cracker is. So adding some Parmesan. This cracker recipe is incredibly flexible. You can do it with, you know, just sea salt on top, which is actually what I've already done this morning, and we'll look at that at the end. You can do it with a sweet taste if you're the kind of person who wants a sweet cracker. Personally, I find that idea abhorrent, but maybe I'm just ignorant, and someday I will eat the sweet cracker of my dreams. All right, so now can bring this dough together. It'll start off pretty sticky, but then it should listen to you, especially if you've added cheese. So it's coming together. You'll give it a little knead when it does come together. There we are. Look at that. I mean, I've heard people online complaining, oh, I'm having to throw away all this flour. No, you shouldn't be throwing away your flour. You can make crackers. And I will warn you, when you've had a homemade cracker, you might turn into Ina Garten, who, in my mind, very famously said, store-bought crackers are okay. But, I mean, homemade crackers are really divine. So let's divide this in two. And we'll roll out half of it. I want to roll out right on top of the parchment paper that I'm going to bake it on. Flip this to the other side. It's curling on me. All right, so you can take your rolling pin. If you don't own a rolling pin, a good hack is you can get a wine bottle. That works pretty well. Yeah, like a Bordeaux bottle, like, you know, the one with the square shoulders. I just sound like a real wine snob. I have a secret wine snob core. I try to keep it hidden, especially now that I don't drink. But yeah. So roll it out. You don't have to worry about it sticking too much, especially because it's on parchment paper. I'm just rotating the paper and kind of working it as I can. You want to make sure it's getting as thin as you can possibly make it without ripping it, obviously. So, you know, and it doesn't need to be a square. Who wants to be square? It's not hip to be square. Okay, so here we have a rolled out sourdough starter cracker with Parmesan. Wow. What we're gonna do, put it here on the pan that I'm gonna bake it on, just because it'll get a little heavier now when I top it. Here's a little olive oil. Rub that friend in. I find that this cracker does like to have oil, otherwise it gets a little dry. And a dip, really great and stuff. Lubna, we've been dipping them in Lubna this weekend around here. It's been fabulous. And then for this one, I'm going to do some flaky sea salt. And some roasted red pepper. And I tried adding the red pepper later on in the bake because it kind of burns a little, but I found that it then really didn't stick to the cracker very well. It is kind of important to, you know, get down in here and make sure that the ingredients are really stuck. All right, and then last thing I'm going to do real quick here is just add some holes with the tines of a fork, and that'll keep it from puffing up. All right, so now that cracker is going to go into the oven for like 15-ish minutes, but basically we're going to do it by smell and sight. We want it to be brown on top but not burnt. And that oven is preheated to 350. Washing my hands, and I'm going to do 2 quick things for our next recipe, which is going to be the pancakes. One is I'm going to turn on my pan here, my skillet. And 2, I'm going to measure out and melt some coconut oil. So here's my large quantity of coconut oil. So it's a 1/4 cup. Just measure that out. And yeah, I've cooked this pancake recipe a lot with you know, more traditional dairy ingredients, buttermilk, butter. And I just really find that the dairy-free version works a lot better. So here, I'm gonna go over to the stove and let this melt for a sec. I want to set a timer for those crackers, else I forget. If you are a baker, I'm sure you already know this, but timers, they're your friend. It's really easy to forget, especially if you bake all the time. It's really easy to forget if you're baking something. I was going to say with BREB, I have sometimes gotten in the habit, especially this time of year when I'm in and out of the kitchen a lot, I sometimes set redundant timers. So I'll have one on my phone and I'll have one in the kitchen, especially when I'm doing that 3-hour folding step. I had someone DM me this week and ask, how do you get the stamina to actually make it through the 4 hours of folding every 30 minutes? And I kind of know what you mean. I mean, I think it can be really easy to lose focus with that activity. But one pro tip would be, or at least one Sandy tip would be, set 2 timers. It's easier to forget otherwise. All right, so that coconut oil is melting. I'm going to go grab it. So I would say that these pancakes and waffles have become, I don't know, my DNA ever since I started baking BREB. They are a real, a frequent appearance in our home. And I've made all sorts of, you can put bananas in them. If one is into chocolate chips, one could put chocolate chips in them. So I'm just melting this oil. I want to make sure that the oil is melted so it will incorporate, but I also want to make sure that it is not going to cook the eggs. So that's one of those like pancakes, I don't know. It just feels like a really classic error, and one that I think a lot of us have done at one point, is you're trying to make pancakes and you take a hot fat and cold eggs and you mix them together and you get scrambled eggs. So that's no fun. Or your fat immediately, is back to its solid state. So I actually took the eggs out already and have been letting them come to slightly room temperature. And then now I'm just going to let that oil melt for a second. So this recipe, it's a play on a King Arthur sourdough pancake waffle recipe. Actually has 2 kind of phases of its life. And so right now what we'll do is we'll demo step 1. I'm going to turn off that pan for now. I'm worried it's a little long. So step 1 is I'm going to make what we call the overnight sponge. And basically this is like the first phase of this pancake's life. It then spends 8 hours kind of, you know, becoming itself. And then actually how we tend to do it, Rob and I, is because he is somebody who's up all night talking to computers or something. And I'm somebody who like falls asleep really early and wakes up at dawn in order to feed plants water. I tend to not be awake very late, but Rob is. So Rob will make me an overnight sponge. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll finish off the waffle or pancake recipe. So it's kind of a fun, I don't know, it's like a fun trick. If you have someone else in your household who likes to be up late, you can teach them how to make the first phase of this recipe. And if you're a morning person like me, you can make pancakes and waffles for everybody before they get up. So here we go. We're going to make a sponge. I'm going to do 2 cups of the all-purpose flour. All right. And then a couple of tablespoons sugar. You know, and this is the kind of thing that if you didn't want to use sugar, you could use other sweeteners, for example, palm sugar. I find this to be a pretty low quantity, so I don't bother subbing with this one. But usually I'm a little bit, you know, wary of using too much sugar in my cooking. And then we will do a couple of cups of oat milk. And 1 cup of the discarded starter, which I'm so excited. This week's episode is actually going to like really put a dent in our reserves, which, as you can imagine, around here we often have a lot of discard. Really discard forward household. Alrighty. Oh, sorry, Brack. We just got some discard on Brack. All right, and we are going to stir all that together. One reason I was trying to turn on my pan a little early there, and I kind of made it too early. I forgot I had to make the sponge, but you really want to make sure your skillet is nice and hot when you're making pancakes. I think that's one of those, like, again, kind of frequent errors that folks make when they're trying to make a pancake. And I'm using my cast iron because it's really, it can get really hot. Nice even cooking surface. All right, so there is a sponge. And now, using the miracle of television, I shall fast forward us 8 hours in time. Here's the sponge that I made at 5 a.m. Great time that I love to be awake. Shout out to my cats who were hunting a mouse. All right, so here's the sponge that has, you know, done its thing for 8 hours roughly. And now we're gonna turn on that skillet again and do the last phase of this recipe. All right, so coconut oil has cooled to the touch. I can kind of feel it through there. And I'm going to mix it in with my 2 eggs. So it's a 1/4 cup of the coconut oil. It's 2 eggs. And then I'll add those to my sponge. Woo! Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And there's 1 red pepper flake, I think. Or maybe that's egg. I'm going to wash my hands. So, mix in those 2. These big Cambro, you know, containers are great for this stuff. Especially, we tend to make this recipe like in doubles or triples, so you have a lot more space in there for that volume. Also, once you start making it, it will bubble a little bit, so you just want to make sure you're in a pretty big vessel, even if you're making a single of this recipe. But also just because you want to make sure it's really well mixed. You don't want any dry clumps in there or anything like that. So, you know, if you're in a little tiny bowl, you might not be actually mixing the ingredients as well. Okay, and then to this, we are going to add some salt and some baking soda. So we'll do 3/4 teaspoon salt. And then for the baking soda, this is an amendment I've made to this recipe just because I've had some bad incidents, I think, where I served a waffle that had like a big clump of baking soda in it, which kind of sucks. So I just take the, like a mesh sieve, and, or, you know, you can take a little, something you can sift through, just to make sure that those baking soda clumps aren't going to end up whole in somebody's pancake or waffle. All right, mix those in, and then it'll really bubble if we've done it right. Yeah, look at that bubble action. Do you see that? Bubble action. There's pet hair. Take that out. All right, now we are going to make a pancake. Pan is feeling nice and hot, which is great. I'm going to use a little coconut oil spray for my non-dairy pancake here. Take a ladle. It's a nice thin pancake recipe, which I really love. It reminds me of my favorite pancakes. Well, other than sourdough pancakes, but my favorite pancakes, which come from Fred's Coffee Shop in Sausalito, California. Have you ever had those? They're thin, divine. So, one ladle. I've got it on the really hot cast iron here. If you have a griddle, that's the greatest. I make sure it's pretty low once I actually get the batter into the pan, because the game here is you don't want to burn it, right? And then the other thing is you want to be looking out for little bubbles around the outside of the pancake. That's how you're going to know when the pancake is ready for you to flip it. Flipping pancakes is objectively scary. I want to validate if you're somebody who's like afraid of cooking pancakes. I think it's pretty scary to flip a pancake, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to wait till we're pretty confident that that first side is done. We know because we can kind of start to see it get a little gummy around the edge, and then those little bubbles will start to appear. I recommend having a really trustworthy tool for this, so I use my largest silicone spatula. Nice surface area, can get really evenly under there. We've made that cook surface super hot, so we know it's not stuck, and use the coconut oil, which is a cooking oil that can go to a high heat. You don't want to use an olive oil spray here, because it'll just burn right off. It won't do what you want, and it won't add a good flavor. So now I'm starting to see the edges of this pancake are looking a little bit gummy. Starting to see some little bubbles forming. You can give it, you can take a peek. Oh yeah, it's starting to look nice and brown. So flip it! And I think just get under there. You don't need to go high up. You don't need to grab the whole skillet and flip it. You're not, unless you're a restaurant cook or you're really confident, but there's no need to make it look pretty. Just get under there, flip it. I do think once you're under there, be confident. Don't panic. Just flip your wrist. Get the thing over. So now pancake's on the other side. Second side usually doesn't take as long. I'm turning it down just a little. And you can always check. See how brown it's getting. Absolutely adore these pancakes. They're so light, so fluffy. And they've got that wonderful sour taste that comes from the sourdough discard. All right, so that's starting to look pretty good. Let me grab a plate for this. All right. And there we have an absolutely divine looking sourdough pancake. Put a little local Catskills syrup on there. This is actually the last thing we bought in March before never leaving our house again, was syrup from a local syrup guy. So there you have it, a sourdough pancake. I'm going to hand that to my dear friend Rob, who's going to enjoy it.
Oh boy.
All right, so 24 seconds left on the clock. Let's go look at that cracker. Looking pretty good. I'm going to give it another 3 minutes or so. As I said before, if you have questions, if you want me to do, to talk about anything in particular, feel free to put it in the comments. And if you have requests for future classes, I would be very interested to hear what is it that you haven't heard me discuss that would be really helpful for you. I'm happy to hear it. So feel free to put that in the comments. Thank you everybody who showed up today. I appreciate it. I hope you find this useful. I hope you get to make some delicious carbs out of kind of trash carbs that we have. It's a real something from nothing, like compost. It's one of my absolute favorites, is making pancakes and crackers. I'm gonna get my husband a fork. Just watched him take a bite of a pancake. Like reaching down with his mouth like a turtle eating a piece of lettuce. All right, let's see if that cracker is done now. Take a look at that. It's looking really beautiful. I think maybe I could cook it for a moment or more, a little longer, but you can kind of see the general idea here. It's getting nice and brown on the edges. It's not burnt yet. Looking really super. I can't wait to eat it. Now, I'm not going to eat it right away because I want to let it kind of sit around and get a little, crispy first. So here's one that I did like an hour ago. And I figure we could actually, break this one up as a demo. This is going to be fun, huh? So this one's just sea salt. Oh, yeah. Look at that. Isn't that fun? You can break it any old way you want. All right. So there you have it. That's a sourdough discard cracker. Olive oil and sea salt. So good. Even without cheese, it has a vaguely cheesy flavor for mysterious reasons. But I think it's the sour from the sourdough. That is so good. So I did have one question come in this week that I'll answer now. And if you have a question, please put it in the comments. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up here. But the one that had come on this week was, and I think it's a good one. We're thinking about our discard. We're thinking about all the lovely stuff that our discard can do for us. How often should you actually clean the vessel out that your discard, or your starter itself rather, lives in? Which I think is a really fair question. I don't think there's some rule of thumb. I think the best answer would be, sorry, one second. Use your best judgment. If it's starting to look really gnarly, I tend to change it out, put it in a whole new vessel once in a while, just kind of based on what it looks like to me. I'll do the same with this discard, container. You don't need to do it all the time. I think mostly it's going to be a matter of personal preference. But for me, when it gets kind of really like a lot of, old starter kind of caked on the side or the front or whatever, I try to just put it into a new version of the same vessel, clean the other one out, move on from there. But yeah, I mean, one of the miraculous things about starters is that they can, you can keep it going. There's starters in San Francisco where I'm from that have been around since the 06 quake and before. So century old plus. That's pretty exciting. So I really appreciate everybody who showed up today to learn a little bit more about discard and all of its amazing potentials. That pancake recipe, of course, can be made into waffles. So if you have a waffle iron, that's really fun. And you can do both at the same time potentially. Yeah, and there's lots of other uses for discard. It doesn't stop here. These are just two of my absolute favorites. Two of the, the crackers and the pancakes are just, I make them all the time. They're so useful. They are delicious, and it's a really great way to use that discard that you're going to be producing if you're feeding a sourdough starter daily. So BREB shows up with friends. That's the answer here. And yeah, my last thought will be the same as my first. If you didn't already today, give some money to bail funds, especially one in sitting near you. I hope you will consider giving some of your money, especially if you're white, especially if you have money. And yeah, thank you to everybody who's protesting. Thank you for coming today, and I'll leave it there. Enjoy your important goos.